Sonia, I'd like us to just talk a little bit more about what's happening in Britain. I'm based in Britain, and so this is really close to our hearts here in England. There's very similar themes that we see happening with the girls here in Britain that has happened in other parts of the world as well. You have done quite a lot of reading, haven't you, on the grooming gangs of Britain? Can you just share a little bit about what you've read and sort of common themes and things that you see happening with the British situation?
I have done some research into the grooming gangs, also because of what we have been talking about previously in other videos, in what is happening in countries such as Nigeria and Pakistan and Egypt. I find it really strange, just to begin with, that can you remember that years ago there was a huge explosion of what happened within the Roman Catholic churches, the abuse by priests.
Oh, yes, I do find that when there's a Christian who has been involved in some sort of abuse case, that people are very quick to point out, oh, it's a Christian priest or it's a pastor also or something.
Right, and rightly so. I mean, if there are issues within our churches that need to be addressed, we need to be bold and, dare to talk about these things.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need it,
So,
and we can't
yeah,
hide from it. Yeah.
absolutely not. And we as Christians are human beings, we're not better than anyone else. But I did find it really interesting that immediately in the news, the programs that I've seen, that I've watched, there was people were trying to connect the celibate lifestyle of Roman Catholic monks or priests with the abuse scandal that was happening. The hierarchy in the church was something they spoke about. All sorts of things were, debated.
Very often secular people discussing about it.
Right. When it is about the UK grooming gangs, you're not allowed to talk about it. Now, that is interesting. Why not? Why I find that particularly important is that in Islam, there is this idea that a non-Muslim cannot testify against a Muslim. And it's by not addressing the issue, it was as if the state, the British state, was actually going along with that idea. As if they were also saying, yes, you're not allowed to testify against the perpetrators who were Muslims. It was as if you were agreeing with that idea.
At the moment, the British authorities have had a lot of pressure put on them by many people in society to look into it more and to address what's happening. And at the same time, there's almost quietly, although some journalists are highlighting it, but there's a push to expand the Islamophobia definitions, which are very, very dangerous and ambiguous in part, when we should actually be opening the doors to let's talk about perpetrators. Is there a connection between the religion and what's happening and so on? Because as Christians, I can respond to a Christian who has been found out to abuse. I have a biblical response to that. And we can look at the life of Jesus and ask whether Jesus would support it. And we need to do the same with Islam. But it's almost with Islam, we're not allowed to ask questions. That's certainly how a lot of people feel.
Yes, unfortunately, because that has caused this whole horrible situation to continue for decades, and because it wasn't properly addressed.
It does seem there were people sometimes in positions of like the council in government authority, at least local authorities. There were police who turned a blind eye, and there have been also social workers turning a blind eye. A journalist was writing. Now, I don't agree with her conclusions of why these things were happening, but she was saying she drove up to a home where vulnerable girls were living, and she suddenly saw a car draw up. It looked like it was Asian men, and a young man got out, and there was an older man, like 40 years old, in the car. A young man gets out, rings the bell, and it looked like he talked to someone who maybe was a lead carer in the house. And suddenly, a few minutes later, a 14-year-old girl comes out, gets in the back car, and drives off with 2 or 3 men in this car. And I thought, wow, even our homes where vulnerable girls are living, they also don't seem to be safe. And it just seems to be endemic across this whole country.
What I think is such a shame is that about 100 years ago in the United Kingdom, almost similar girls were the subject of forced prostitution, British girls from the lower classes. And it was a huge campaign led by Christians, predominantly Christians. They signed a manifesto. Florence Nightingale was one of them. The couple that founded the Salvation Army was part of that, and a Christian lady called Josephine Butler. And they worked for at least 12 years to get an age of consent, because British girls at that time were even sexually exploited across the European continent, Belgium, for example. What Butler and the others were trying to do was get an age of consent, meaning that anything else was statutory rape, right? So you cannot have sex with a minor, but also that any guardian allowing this to happen to his ward or his daughter or pupil or whatever would also be punishable. And you have an inscription on the Old Bailey which says, protect the children of the poor and punish the wrongdoers. And when I was standing outside, this was in, I think, 2018 or something, when Tommy Robinson was then on trial. And I was standing outside looking at all these, this crowd. There was Antifa, there were supporters of Tommy Robinson. And all the time I was looking at that inscription, thinking, we've come really far from that original
Yeah,
intention.
yeah.
100 years after the campaign that Josephine Butler, Florence Nightingale, and others were doing, now again allow for British girls, vulnerable girls, to be sexually exploited, and again having no legal representation or defense.
Even vulnerable girls from Muslim communities can also be affected by or not protected by authorities. There was a story written up in a book called The Imam's Daughter. I don't know if you ever read that.
I haven't known.
It was written a couple of decades ago, I think. The Imam's Daughter by Hannah Shah. It's her own story, written, someone else wrote it with her. And she was the daughter of an imam. And he raped her, I believe, till she was about 16 years old. She tried to go to the authorities as she got a little older. And one of the first times she went to the authorities, they brought in a social worker. He was from the same community, and he told her to not shame their culture and to go back to that. She should not be shaming the culture and to go and the religion and to go back into the family. She was sent back, and it was a second time. Finally, a Christian somehow got involved, and she was able to leave that dangerous environment, find safety, and she became a Christian in the end. And she's now married to a lovely Christian man. I don't know where she is, but I know she's serving the Lord with her husband somewhere. But that's a story of a Muslim girl who's vulnerable, and the authorities turned a blind eye, and in their naivety thought they were helping to bring in someone from her culture. She was a Pakistani girl, and they brought in a Pakistani social worker, and the social worker didn't protect her. And in that story, she was finally able to completely be free by finding people who would help her. And it was Christians who were part of that process, part of that story as well. So this is not just affecting culturally Christian girls, Sikh girls. There would be some vulnerable Muslim girls too, because people are turning a blind eye to something that is happening across the country. And it's not just in one town, it's across the country. What is also intriguing is when you look at testimonies from around the world, it's happening in other European countries, but the ethnicity of the perpetrators will be different. The connection then is not the ethnic connection. The connection then seems to be a religious connection. Would you say that's fair, including those of where you live and other countries around, that the connection is not ethnicity, the connection is a religious connection, people who are really implementing the life of Muhammad?
Yeah, I think there's three things that are important here. First of all, the fact that also Muslim girls are being abused, is briefly mentioned. I think it is in the report on Rotherham. And I've asked for so many years people from within the Muslim community that were speaking out about the grooming gangs, why don't we talk about this? But it's very difficult. And that brings me to the second subject, and that is the idea of zina. And you see, for example, in countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, other Muslim countries, Iraq, Syria, that a girl who is raped often is supposed to marry her rapist. Because Indonesia as well, by the way, parents consider the idea of a girl committing zina, so extramarital sexual activities, worse than their daughter being raped. So that shame needs to go, right? And marriage is one of the ways, that is the only way you're allowed to have a sexual relationship as a woman. So then they are supposed to marry their rapist, and all is well. You also see the connection with child marriage. So to prevent a girl from committing zina because she has urges during a certain age, when she grows into puberty and starts fancying boys, for example, is to marry girls off at a very young age. By the way, some
Rather than maybe teaching self-control and
right,
that God
as
can help us have self-control.
right, as we discussed earlier on in one of our other videos as well, right? So the fruits of the spirit, one of them is self-control, right? But
Yeah.
no, instead of that, you bring them from the father into the house of a husband. And not all, but some people actually also connect zina with female genital mutilation. So it is to
As a way
sometimes,
to curb her sexual desire so she won't go be immoral and go
right.
off with someone.
So that's a whole different concept of control, right? And this
So
also,
why is a young man not asked to control?
yeah, because the shame of the family is, the reputation of the family is very much, the girls identified with that. And another thing is honor killings. Very often, also when they think a girl has committed zina or was almost at a stage where she would start doing that. This is a very important concept that people in the West just don't seem to focus on, but it's very important theological concept in Islam that we need to address.
In some of the testimonies of the girls, they'll say this, that the Muslim men who have raped them say, well, Western girls deserve it. Our Muslim girls don't do this. Western girls deserve it. Look at the way you dress. Look at basically your kafir, your real negative viewpoint of others outside of Islam. So as a result, a girl can then be abused. Are the official reports addressing that view of the other? Are they're acknowledging the eyewitness accounts, but are they addressing that this is an issue that not only comes from certain Muslim communities, but it's the opinion. You can glean it from the Quran. You can glean it from some Islamic law. The second class citizen of a non-Muslim under an Islamic regime. It's all there.
It is all there, but specifically those zina, that the ethics, the ethical norms that stem from that. I think it was Ibn Taymiyyah, who's an Islamic scholar from, I think, the 12th, 13th century, who said that a woman who hasn't been female, her genitals weren't cut, so to speak, or a woman who doesn't cover up, that, she's of ill repute. So it doesn't mean that every Muslim thinks it's okay to rape children. You are not saying that, I'm not saying
Yeah,
that. We
absolutely.
are saying that there are certain ethics that need to be addressed openly. Instead of that, we've been covering things up for decades.
For fear of offending.
Yes, and it only makes things worse. There's another thing that, as I said, there are three very important things. Also connecting with what you've just asked me, do reports mention this? Unfortunately, what we hear from girls is that very often they internalize things and they actually believed that they were prostitutes. They actually believed that they were doing this voluntarily. But obviously, and this is the problem, going back to the law in the UK, where the law should protect them and say, even if they didn't, but even if you would do this voluntarily, you're not allowed. And anyone who is engaging in a sexual relationship or sexual activities with a minor should be punished, prosecuted and punished. But unfortunately, that did not happen. And that, again, going back, allowed for girls to think, well, maybe I am a prostitute, because otherwise someone would have done something. from within the authorities. All of that, it's so connected. It's not my place to criticize another country, but I think I would suggest very kindly the UK to start discussing these things, because
Not expanding Islamophobia laws.
I think you have far more important issues to deal with right now. And also to prevent the polarization in society by denying what has been happening. And I believe that until now, nobody within the police or within city council has been held responsible for their complete lack of urgency to help these girls, giving perpetrators the idea that somehow this was okay because they got away with it. So, yeah, all of these things have caused a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, and a sense of discrimination among the people, that we say that child rape is wrong, but there's a group that can get away with it.